The elegant ballroom sparkled with twinkling lights, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air. It was a perfect setting for a wedding, and I was doing my best to smile, even though a wave of discomfort rolled over me. It was my sister's special day, and I didn't want to overshadow her joy, but something about the event felt so off. As I entered the reception hall, I tried to steady my nerves. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, all of it made me feel like I didn't belong. I had always been close to my sister, but today, something felt different. Maybe it was the overwhelming sense of not being enough. I walked toward my seat and saw the place card on the table. I half expected something warm, a gentle reminder of my place as family, but instead, my breath caught in my throat when I read the words, "Single mother, waitress." My eyes burned as I stared at the card, the words almost mocking me. I wasn't ashamed of being a single mother. I loved my son more than anything in the world. And being a waitress was hard work, yes, but it paid the bills. It provided for us. But somehow, seeing it printed on that card felt like a label I didn't deserve. I had been working so hard to be more than just that. So why did it feel like everyone was seeing me for less than I was? I took my seat quietly, my face forced into a smile, but my mind was racing. The whispers around me weren't loud enough to hear, but I could feel them. People judging, people looking at me differently, wondering what I was doing there. I had always known that being the single mother at a wedding would be awkward, but this was different. As the evening progressed, I tried to focus on the celebration, on my sister's happiness. I clinked my glass in a toast and forced myself to laugh at the jokes shared around the table. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone saw me differently. Just as I was about to lose myself in the crowd, the music shifted. My son, Ben, who had been sitting next to me, suddenly stood up. He was only 10, but his eyes were fierce as he spoke, his small voice cutting through the murmur of the room. "I'm proud of my mom," he said loudly, making everyone turn toward him. "She's the hardest working person I know. She's the best waitress, the best mom, and she does everything for me. No one can tell her who she is." I froze. Ben's words were like a beacon in the room. The whispers stopped, the awkwardness faded away, and I looked at my son in a new light. He had spoken the truth I had been too afraid to say myself. The room fell silent for a moment, and then people started to clap. The applause was unexpected, but it was the kind of recognition that felt both overwhelming and comforting. My son, in his innocent way, had stood up for me. And suddenly, I wasn't just the single mother sitting in the corner. I wasn't the waitress everyone looked at with pity or judgment. In that brief moment, my son had taken the weight of the world off my shoulders. The room went quiet, save for the distant sound of clinking glasses and low murmurs of surprise. I felt everyone's eyes on me, but this time, it wasn't in a way that made me shrink. It felt like a shift, not just in how they saw me, but in how I saw myself. My sister Emily smiled at me from across the room, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Pride? Recognition? I wasn't sure, but there was a warmth in her gaze that hadn't been there before. The discomfort that had settled in my chest began to ease, replaced by something unexpected. Gratitude. I looked down at Ben, who was still standing, his little chest puffed out with pride. He caught my eye and gave me a small, shy smile. It was then that I realized just how much strength I had been holding back. Ben's courage had pulled me out of my shell, had forced me to stand tall when I wanted nothing more than to disappear. I gently squeezed his hand, trying to hide the tears that were threatening to spill. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice shaky. "You're my hero." He smiled wider, his face glowing with the purest form of joy. He didn't understand the magnitude of what he had just done, but I did. As the evening went on, I found myself more relaxed than I had been all day. People started coming up to me, not with the kind of awkward pity I had anticipated, but with genuine warmth. I spoke to distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, and rather than the uncomfortable silences I had expected, the conversations were filled with laughter and connection. Even Emily, my sister, who had always seemed so perfect in comparison to me, began to share stories with me. Stories of how hard it was to plan this wedding, how she, too, had struggled with the pressures of family expectations. By the time the dinner was over and the dancing started, I realized that this night wasn't just about the wedding. It wasn't about the table or the awkwardness I had felt when I first walked in. It was about recognition. Not just of my role as a mother, but of everything I had done for my son and how far I had come. Later, as I stood with Ben by the dance floor, watching my sister dance with her new husband, I thought about the past. I thought about all the times I had doubted myself, all the moments I had felt invisible. But tonight, I wasn't invisible. I was seen. And more importantly, I was proud of who I had become. As the evening drew to a close, Ben tugged at my sleeve. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm glad we came." This was fun. I smiled down at him, my heart full. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As the final notes of the music played and the last guests began to leave, I stood by the door with Ben, waiting for the wedding party to finish up. The night had been a whirlwind of emotions, surprises, and a sense of renewal I hadn't expected. I wasn't just leaving the wedding as a guest anymore, but as someone who had reclaimed a sense of pride in who I was and the journey I had walked. We were among the last to leave. The once bustling ballroom was now quieter, the bright lights dimming as people said their goodbyes. My sister, Emily, was with her husband, talking to some close friends. She looked happy, glowing with joy in a way that only newlyweds can. But despite her happiness, there was a knowing look in her eyes when she caught my gaze. It was as if she understood. She knew I had been through so much, and though we had spent years apart, tonight, something had shifted between us. "Hey, sis," I called, walking toward her. Ben, still holding my hand, trotted along beside me. He was already wearing his coat, looking like he was ready to go home. I couldn't help but smile at his eagerness to get back to his routine. But at the same time, I felt a sense of pride swelling inside me. Tonight wasn't just about the wedding. It was about healing, about starting fresh. Emily turned to face me, a warm smile lighting up her face. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice full of sincerity. I took a deep breath, wanting to get my words just right. For years, I had felt overshadowed by her, unable to live up to her seemingly perfect life. But tonight had been different. Tonight I had finally found my place, not as her little sister who always played second fiddle, but as an equal, with my own worth and story to tell. "I wasn't sure what to expect when I came," I said slowly, feeling the weight of my thoughts. "But I've realized something important tonight. I've been letting the past define me, letting what others think control how I see myself. But Ben?" I glanced down at my son, who was now standing at my side, his small face beaming with innocence. Ben reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I don't need anyone's approval. I don't need to apologize for who I am, for what I've accomplished. I've built my life. I've built us. And that's more than enough. Emily's expression softened, and I saw something that made my heart skip. Respect. It wasn't just the pity or condescension I had expected from her after all these years. It was recognition. She was looking at me in a way I had never felt before. And I realized in that moment that this was the first time we were seeing each other as equals, as women who had both fought their own battles. "You've always been stronger than you think," Emily said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I've never said it before, but I admire you. You've done so much on your own, and I'm sorry if I've ever made you feel less than that." The weight of her words hit me harder than I anticipated. For years, I had been trying to earn her respect, trying to prove that I was worthy of her admiration. But tonight, I realized that I didn't need to try anymore. I was worthy, simply because I was myself. "I've always admired you too," I replied, the words flowing freely. But I was so focused on trying to fit into the mold that I thought was expected of me. It's only tonight that I realized I don't have to do that anymore. I've been enough all along. We stood there for a moment, silently understanding each other in a way that words couldn't fully express. Then, Emily reached out and hugged me tightly. It wasn't a fleeting gesture, it was a moment of real connection, of healing, of something that had been broken for so long, now mended. "I'm really proud of you," she whispered into my ear. "You've taught me something tonight." I squeezed her back, my heart full. This wasn't just a sisterly hug. It was a symbol of growth, of mutual understanding. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. I didn't need to prove myself anymore, and neither did she. We had both arrived at a place where we could stand side by side, not in competition, but in support. As we pulled away, I looked down at Ben, who was holding my coat and looking up at us with curiosity. "Ready to go home, kiddo?" I asked, my voice soft. He nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Mom, I'm tired, but I'm glad we came. You were awesome." I smiled and hugged him, my heart swelling with love for this little boy who had no idea how much he had changed everything for me. He had reminded me of my worth. He had made me see that I didn't need to hide or shrink in the shadow of anyone else. I was enough, just as I was. With my sister by my side and my son holding my hand, we walked out of the ballroom together. The night, once filled with tension and uncertainty, had turned into something beautiful. It had been a night of healing, a night of reclaiming my strength, and a night of being seen. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I knew this was just the beginning of something new, for all of us. As we walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air, I felt a sense of release that I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the past was no longer pressing down on me. It wasn't that everything had been magically fixed. No, that wasn't it at all. It was that, for the first time, I felt like I was finally seeing myself for who I truly was. I wasn't defined by my circumstances, my past mistakes, or my labels. I was just me, a woman, a mother, someone who had fought for what she had and who had done it all on her terms. Ben was walking beside me, still holding my hand, his excitement from the day still fresh in his eyes. I could see it in him, the strength, the joy, the confidence. He didn't see me as a waitress, as a single mother, or as anything else the world might want to label me. He just saw me as his mom, and in that simple, pure way, he made me feel invincible. It wasn't about the validation from others anymore. It was about the love I had for him and the love he had for me. That was all that mattered. I could feel Emily walking behind us, her footsteps steady and confident. We had reached a turning point, not just for me, but for her too. I could sense it in the way she carried herself now. The warmth between us was undeniable. I knew things would never be the same again, but they didn't need to be. We didn't need to go back to what we had before. We were building something new, something stronger and more real. We reached the car, and as I opened the door for Ben to hop in, I turned to Emily. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft but filled with gratitude, "for understanding, for giving me the space to be who I am, without judgment." Emily smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "You don't have to thank me, sis. I'm proud of you. I don't know if I've ever told you that enough, but I am." For the first time, I realized how much we had both grown. We were no longer the same two sisters who had once competed for the same spotlight. We had learned to give each other space, to support each other, to let go of old grudges and embrace the new understanding we had of one another. Ben climbed into the back seat, and I followed, buckling up and glancing at Emily one last time before we drove away. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't thought was possible. I had spent so many years doubting myself, feeling invisible, feeling like I didn't belong. But tonight, everything had changed. As we drove back home, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the painful moments, the heartaches, the doubts, and the fears. But I realized that all of it had shaped me into the person I was today, a person who had the strength to stand up for herself, to embrace her worth, and to never again apologize for who she was. That night wasn't about a wedding or a party. It wasn't about the awkwardness I had felt walking into that room or the way I had been judged by the seating card. It was about something deeper, about finally being seen. It was about finding peace within myself, despite the imperfections, despite the struggles. I was enough. I could hear Ben's voice from the back seat as he chatted about how much fun he had, telling me about the cake and the dancing. I smiled at his energy. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but I did. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just doing this for him, I was doing this for me. I had spent so many years living for others, trying to gain their approval, trying to fit into their boxes, but now I was living for myself, and that was something no one could take away. When we got home, I tucked Ben into bed, kissing him goodnight, and watching him drift off to sleep with a peaceful smile on his face. As I closed the door softly behind me, I stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. Tonight was a turning point, not just in my relationship with my family, but in the way I viewed myself. I didn't need anyone's validation to know I was worthy. And as I stood in the quiet of the night, looking out of the window at the city lights, I whispered to myself, I am enough. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own lessons, and I knew there would be times when I'd feel lost again. But tonight, I knew that no matter what happened, I had found my strength, and that, above all, was the most important thing I had discovered.